The Six-Day War between Israel and Syria, Jordan, and Egypt took place June 5th through June 10th in 1967. Prior to the war, Nasser, president of Egypt, announced the prospective union of Syria, Egypt, and Iraq in April of 1963. In addition, attacks conducted against Israel by Palestinian guerrilla groups based in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan had increased, leading to costly Israeli reprisals. The United Nations had established a presence in the Middle East in 1956 after the Suez Crisis. They were in agreement with the nations that had acted as a host. In May of 1967, after Syria alleged that Israel was massing troops along the border, Egypt mobilized its forces and made it clear that the United Nations was no longer wanted in the Suez region. Nasser ordered a concentration of military forces in the Suez zone. On May 19th, the UN peacekeepers left, and 3 days later, Egypt closed the Strait of Tiran to Israeli shipping. The Israelis viewed these actions as Egypt preparing to attack. The Soviet intelligence reports in May also indicated that Israel was planning a campaign against Syria, and although inaccurate, the information heightened tensions between Israel and its Arab neighbors. On May 30th, Jordan signed a mutual defense treaty with Egypt, Syria, and other Arab states. With every state that signed, Israel's government on June 4th authorized its military to launch a surprise attack against Arab air power. On June 5th, Israel executed a strike against Egypt and its allies. Almost 200 pilots took part in the airstrike, and their mission was to wipe out the Egyptian Air Force, the largest in the Arab world. To avoid radar detection, they flew north, then west at only 20 meters above the sea, with total radio silence. At 7:45 a.m., they ascended to an altitude of 4,000 feet and bombed 11 Egyptian airfields. The Egyptians couldn't have been more surprised, and in 2 hours, Israel had destroyed almost all of the Egyptian Air Force before they had made it off the ground. Unaware of the Egyptian defeat, the Jordanians, Syrians, and Iraqis were encouraged by false reports coming from Cairo and launched their own aircraft against Israel. These attacks were ineffective, but gave the Israelis reason to launch attacks on the other fronts and expand the scope of the war. The third and fourth wave of Israeli attacks focused on the Jordanian and Syrian airfields and an airfield in Iraq. By the end of the day, Israel had won total control of the skies. On the ground, Israeli troops stormed into Syria, Jordan, and Egypt through the northern and central axis. In the days that followed, the Israeli troops pushed back the soldiers of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. On the second day of fighting, the Egyptian army commander, Marshal Amour, gave orders to the Egyptian troops to evacuate Sinai and move west within 24 hours to the Suez Canal. This caused the complete collapse of the Egyptian front. The Israeli troops advanced to the Suez Canal, and by the 7th of June, Israeli forces captured the west bank of Jordan. Israeli paratroopers charged into the old city of Jerusalem. They came under fire from Jordanian snipers, and they still pushed on. By the afternoon, Jerusalem was in Israeli hands. Despite a potential UN ceasefire, the Israeli forces proceeded on and captured Golan Heights in the last 2 days of the war. Israel had won the war in 6 days. Egypt lost roughly 80% of their military capacity, and over 30,000 were dead and injured in Jordan and Syria. Before the war, Israel was only a strip of land between Arab states. After the war, Israel grew to 5 times its original size. It claimed the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the Old City of Jerusalem, Golan Heights, and the West Bank. Israel demanded that the Arab world recognize the State of Israel. Arab leaders refused to recognize them as a state and insisted on a total Israeli withdrawal from the territories they had just occupied. However, Egypt eventually negotiated peace with Israel, and in 1982 the Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in exchange for full diplomatic recognition of Israel. Egypt and Jordan later gave up their respective claims to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank to the Palestinians, who beginning in the 1990s opened land for peace talks with Israel. In 2005, Israel left the Gaza Strip. Still, a permanent Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement remains elusive, as does an agreement with Syria to return Golan Heights. Many aspects of this war can be compared to that of Chris Hedges in his book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. On page 3, Hedges says, "And war is an enticing elixir. It gives us a resolve, a cause. It allows us to be noble. The us-them boundaries created between Israel and its Arab neighbors allowed them to view each other as inhuman. Each side believed that they were better than the other. Hedges points out that many times during war, the enemy is not even seen as a person. We see this in the Six-Day War when the Arab nations refused to recognize Israel as a state. Hedges also states, the enduring attraction of war is this: even with its destruction and carnage, it can give us what we long for in life. It can give us purpose, meaning, a reason for living. In this case, the purpose of the war was to give meaning to the Israeli people. Before the war, they were seen as small and had no name for themselves. After the war, Israel had proved that it was a prominent military power. As I previously stated, Israel chose to fight instead of waiting to be attacked. They wanted to prove their worth. They felt that taking out the most powerful military in the Arab world would exemplify this power. Israel was given diplomatic recognition, and in an effort to reach this step, they turned to violence.